You've all heard, "Let them eat cake," right? It's the line that made a queen famous for being evil. But what if I told you she never actually said it? The real story is insane, and it was all part of a vicious smear campaign that has fooled everyone for centuries. Today, we are exposing the biggest lies in history. If you think your history books were 100% true, you are wrong. History is filled with rumors, propaganda, and stories that are just too crazy not to be true. These legends get passed down until literally everyone believes them. They stick around because they're the stories we want to believe about our heroes and villains. But today, we are peeling back the lies to get to the uncomfortable and way more fascinating truth. We're going to unmask some of history's craziest myths, and I promise you will never see these famous people the same way again. Marie Antoinette and the mythical cake. It's 18th century France. The entire country is in chaos. People are literally starving in Paris, and when the Queen is told they have no bread, she says the most heartless line in history, "Let them eat cake." It's the perfect quote to make her a total villain and maybe even make you think she deserved what she got. It makes the French Revolution feel like a simple story of good versus evil. The only problem is, she never said it. There is zero evidence. In fact, a version of that exact phrase was already in a book before she was even queen. The line shows up in a book by the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 1760s. He remembers a great princess who, when told peasants had no bread, said, "Let them eat brioche." Brioche isn't cake, but it's a super rich bread that no starving person could afford, so the meaning is the same. But here's the craziest detail. When this was written, Marie Antoinette was just an 11-year-old kid still living in Austria. She hadn't even stepped foot in France yet. So how did this quote get pinned on her? Propaganda. It's that simple. People hated her for being from Austria, and they used pamphlets to paint her as Madame Deficit, a foreign queen who was spending all the country's money. These attacks were filled with lies to make the public hate her. Pinning this cold quote on her was the ultimate way to turn her into the face of evil. The myth was so powerful that it wasn't even linked to her in print until 1843, a full 50 years after she was executed. The real Marie Antoinette was way more complicated. Some records even show she gave to charity. The lie stuck because it was the perfect story about a woman everyone was already trained to despise. Next, we are tackling a myth so huge it has its own psychology term, the Napoleon complex. We all know the stereotype, a short guy who tries to take over the world to make up for his height. The term is named after Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor who supposedly tried to conquer Europe just to feel taller. His enemies drew him as little bony, like a tiny, angry child emperor. These cartoons were insane propaganda during the Napoleonic Wars, and for some reason, we still believe them today. But what if I told you Napoleon wasn't even short? At his death, he was measured as 5 feet 2 inches in French units, and that's where the confusion started. The French inch was longer than the British inch. When you convert his height, Napoleon was actually between 5'6" and 5'7". To give you some perspective, the average height for a French man back then was about 5'5". This means Napoleon was not just average, he was actually taller than the average guy. So why was he called the Little Corporal? It was a nickname of respect from his soldiers. It was a nod to the fact that he would get down in the trenches with them, not because he was short. The myth was also pushed because he always surrounded himself with his imperial guard, elite soldiers who were all required to be taller than him. Of course, anyone would look short, standing next to a bunch of giants. The truth is, the image of a tiny tyrant is one of the most successful smear campaigns in history, perfectly designed by his enemies to make his insane legacy seem smaller. If you love seeing history's biggest lies get exposed, smash that subscribe button right now. We have more myths to destroy. Now we're crossing the ocean to America for a myth everyone learned in grade school: George Washington's wooden teeth. It's a funny image, right? We picture the first president of the United States leading a nation with a mouth full of wood. This story makes this legendary figure seem more human, like he had normal problems just like us. The story probably started because his dentures got stained over time, making them look dark and grainy like wood. But the truth is a million times more gruesome. George Washington never had wooden teeth. His dentures were made from an insane mix of materials: elephant and hippo ivory, gold wire, lead, and, this is crazy, real human teeth. Washington's diaries are filled with entries about his horrible dental problems. He had his first tooth pulled when he was only 24, and by the time he was president, he only had one of his own teeth left. The human teeth for his dentures were bought from people, sometimes even his own enslaved workers, or from poor people who sold them for cash. These dentures were so painful, they changed the shape of his jaw and made it hard for him to even speak in public. So, why do we stick with the wooden teeth story? Because the truth is super dark? The folksy story of wooden teeth is way easier to accept than the reality of a rich man wearing dentures made from ivory and teeth bought from poor people. The myth survives because it covers up a harsh reality and makes a historical figure feel more relatable, even if it's a total lie. For our final myth, we're jumping into science with a story you've heard a million times. It's supposed to make you feel better if you're bad at school. Albert Einstein, the symbol of genius, failed math as a kid. It's a nice thought, right? If even Einstein sucked at math, then there's hope for all of us. The story makes him seem like a misunderstood daydreamer that the school system failed, who then became a genius. It's a great story, and it's completely fake. The truth is, Albert Einstein was a math god. In 1935, someone showed him a newspaper that said, "Greatest living mathematician failed in mathematics," and Einstein literally laughed and said, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." So where did this massive rumor come from? It probably started because he took an entrance exam for a top university when he was only 16, 2 years younger than everyone else, and he did fail it. But he got unbelievably high scores on the math and physics parts. The subjects he failed were non-science things like French, botany, and zoology. His math skills were never, ever the problem. In fact, his school records show he was always the #1 student in his math classes. By the time he was 12, he was doing college-level geometry for fun. The myth of Einstein, the math failure, is a perfect example of how a tiny piece of truth, failing one exam, gets twisted into a massive lie. It's a comforting story, but it completely disrespects his insane early genius. A queen who never offered cake, an emperor who wasn't short, a president with teeth more horrifying than wood, and a genius who was always a genius. It's obvious that history is filled with stories that are more fiction than fact. These myths stick around because they're simple, They're powerful, and they're way more interesting than the complicated truth. They exist to make an enemy a villain or to make us feel better. But the real stories, the ones hiding just under the surface, are so much crazier. They show us how propaganda can literally change history for centuries and how a good story can replace the truth. So, the next time you hear a historical fact that sounds a little too perfect, don't believe it. The real story is always waiting to be found. What other historical myths do you want me to destroy? Let me know in the comments below. I literally read every single one. And if you enjoyed us exposing these insane lies, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the real story behind everything you thought you knew. Thanks for watching.